Christmas is a time for joy, laughter, and horror. Although at first it may seem like an unlikely combination, Christmas is no stranger to the horror genre. Once you peel back the Christmas lights and take a look under the tree, even some of the most traditional Christmas classics have an eerie undertone. Home Alone is the terrible tale of a child tormented by outside forces. The Grinch, to start, is a heartless monster who plagues Whoville. Polar Express is... well, that one actually is a horror film, right? And It's a Wonderful Life tells a warning tale of loss, recalling the most obviously creepy Christmas tale of all, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. This eerie undertone should come as no surprise. Both historically and psychologically, Christmas and horror are actually a pretty natural fit. To understand why Christmas adapts so naturally to horror, we can first look to Freud's idea of the uncanny. Freud's theory of the uncanny suggests that the deepest forms of horror arise not from the wholly unfamiliar, but from the unsettling distortion of what we know. Horror cinema relies on this effect constantly, by animating objects that should remain lifeless, disrupting the body's normal functions, or resurrecting the dead as ghosts and zombies. These figures occupy a liminal space between life and death, the familiar and the strange. In this sense, the very presence of Christmas within horror can be considered uncanny. Freud highlights the dual meanings of the German words Heimlich and unheimlich, the former implying both homeliness and hidden danger, and the latter describing what is eerie or exposed. Few things feel more comforting or nostalgic than Christmas. Yet when horror twists its familiar symbols, the season's warmth becomes something threatening. Few contemporary texts illustrate Freud's theory of the uncanny as effectively as The Nightmare Before Christmas. The film's entire premise hinges on the unsettling tension between the familiar and the unfamiliar. Jack Skellington, the embodiment of Halloween's macabre aesthetic, becomes fascinated by the warmth and domesticity of Christmas. Yet when he attempts to replicate it, the result is a distorted imitation, recognizable in shape but fundamentally wrong in texture and tone. Christmas is not being parodied or mocked, but simply misunderstood, translated through a worldview built on death, skeletons, and fright. This is the uncanny at its most potent. The homely rendered strange not through hostility but through misalignment. Freud writes that the uncanny emerges when something once familiar returns in a distorted form, and that is exactly what the film visualizes. It shows that horror doesn't need to destroy Christmas to make it frightening. It only needs to imitate it imperfectly. The idea of the uncanny Christmas didn't emerge in a vacuum. It echoes a much older seasonal tradition. Ghost stories have long been a part of the English Christmas tradition. Winter was historically seen as the season of death, cold, dark, and barren, while Christmas symbolized the promise of rebirth on the horizon through the birth of Christ. In that liminal space between death and renewal, telling eerie stories felt not only natural but expected. This tradition stretches back centuries. In Shakespeare's The Winter's Tale from 1623, the atmosphere of the season is steeped in the supernatural, and even earlier medieval customs help shape this connection between winter and the uncanny. The Feast of Fools, which was celebrated in early December, was all about gathering together and breaking down social hierarchies, and scary stories were an important part of that ritual. A reminder that winter belonged as much to ghosts and spirits as to feasting and fellowship. By the 17th and 18th centuries, however, the old minstrel traditions were fading. Puritan influence had dampened the more chaotic elements of the season, and even among those who still celebrated Christmas, it became a far quieter affair, more about gathering, eating, and telling stories than about communal revelry. This growing restraint helped shape the Christmas that emerged in the early 1800s, a solemn, family-centered holiday focused on religious reflection and domestic warmth. Yet ghost stories survived the transition. In a Victorian world that prized home, hearth, and morality, the supernatural became a tool for introspection. Charles Dickens' 1843 story A Christmas Carol is by far the most famous example, blending domestic ideals with haunting visitations.
The Marleys were dead to begin with.
Well, pardon me?
That's how the story begins, Rizzo. The Marleys were dead to begin with.
Oh.
As dead as a doornail.
It's a good beginning. It's creepy and kind of woohoo, spooky.
Oh, thank you, Rizzo.
You're welcome, Mr. Dickens.
The tradition carried into the early 20th century through writers like M.R. James, who penned ghost stories specifically to read aloud to friends at Christmas time, keeping the ritual alive around crackling fires and dark winter nights. From medieval feasts to Victorian drawing rooms, ghost stories have always been woven into Christmas, a reminder that winter's darkness has its own stories to tell. Given this long history, it's no surprise that the connection between Christmas and the macabre eventually carried into the age of film. In the 1970s, the film industry experienced a creative and financial boom. Due to a lawsuit, the old Hollywood studio system collapsed, and in its place rose a bunch of young independent filmmakers, many of which were interested in making subversive genre cinema. Thanks to this, there was a greater variety of interesting horror films put on screen than ever before. And some of these were the first horror Christmas films we ever got. The British film Whoever Slew Auntie Roo from 1971 is often named as the first Christmas-themed horror movie. Drawing loosely on Hansel and Gretel, it features a witch-like figure and uses a Christmas party mainly as the backdrop. Then, the following year, the American TV series Tales from the Crypt introduced a now iconic trope, a killer dressed as Santa, a deeply uncanny image that featured in the segment and all through the house. But most notably, in 1972, the US saw its first theatrical Christmas horror release, Silent Night, Bloody Night, notable for being the earliest film to twist holiday phrasing directly into its title. But the true defining moment came in 1974. The late 1970s, ushered in by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Halloween, is often cited as the beginning of the slasher boom. But casual slasher fans too often overlook the fact that the spark of the subgenre ignited a few years earlier, in 1974 with Black Christmas. Bob Clark's film established a template that would echo through the genre. Its unnerving atmosphere, bleak and ambiguous ending, and its inventive use of a festive setting all set it apart from its contemporaries. Clark turned the trappings of Christmas, lights, snow, and decorations into sources of dread without entirely stripping them of their childhood innocence. But later films would gleefully cross this line. Yet still, it was Black Christmas that truly proved that the holiday season could be fertile ground for horror. With its winter setting and its notorious phone calls, the film not only anticipated later slasher conventions, but also laid the groundwork for an entire wave of killer Christmas movies. In these later entries, it has become almost obligatory for the murderer to don Santa's bright red suit, an uncanny, distorted version of a beloved icon. Ironically though, this imagery never appears in Black Christmas itself, yet the movie's influence still looms large over the subgenre. The Santa slasher film remains a strangely natural pairing. The collision of Yuletide cheer and violent horror feels almost inevitable. In that sense, it may be more accurate to think of Father Christmas as Father Slasher, for it is from his jolly holiday that a significant branch of the slasher genre was born. Although Christmas horror never disappeared after its early surge, the overcrowded slasher market of the 1980s pushed many titles into obscurity. Thankfully, that changed in 1984 when the genre snapped back into prominence with two wildly different releases: Joe Dante's Gremlins, which brought festive chaos to a mainstream audience, and Silent Night, Deadly Night, whose controversy cemented Christmas horror as a lasting tradition. Gremlins quickly became an 80s touchstone, blending Amblin charm with genuine nightmare fuel. The film's mischievous creatures, its sudden bursts of violence, and even Kate's infamous story of her father dying while dressed as Santa shocked younger viewers and unsettled older ones.
Firemen came and broke through the chimney top, and me and Mom were expecting them to pull out a dead cat or a bird. And instead, they pulled out my father.
Beneath its holiday mayhem, critics have read broader themes: unchecked American consumerism, cultural appropriation, and the dangers of irresponsibility. Its surprising intensity even helped prompt the creation of the MPAA's PG-13 rating. Yet the uproar surrounding Gremlins paled in comparison to the firestorm ignited by Silent Night, Deadly Night. The film may not be polished, but its marketing made it instantly notorious. Taglines like "You've made it through Halloween, now try and survive Christmas" promised a worthy successor to Carpenter, while the movie they tried to ban helped drive curious audiences to the theatre. Spoiler alert, unusually the killer, Billy, is the film's protagonist, a traumatized orphan raised under rigid Catholic discipline, who unravels when confronted with Santa imagery at every turn. His subsequent rampage, complete with Christmas-themed kills, provoked protests from parent groups, the pulling of TV ads, and scathing condemnations from major critics. Despite spawning several sequels, Silent Night, Deadly Night didn't usher in a new wave of theatrical holiday slashers.
Carpet Day! Huh? No!
Most later Christmas horror went straight to video and faded from view, but still, the film's cult reputation endures, partly because of the strange psychosexual undercurrent running through Billy's story, his childlike obsession with naughty and nice, which echoes other Christmas films like Christmas Evil and P2, where lonely, emasculated men interpret Santa's moral authority with unsettling literalness. These Santa complex killers don't remove Christ from Christmas. They amplify its moralism to a grotesque extreme. It's a fertile vein of holiday horror, and one still ripe for a modern reimagining. In fact, just this year, we've got a release of a remake/reboot of Silent Night, Deadly Night. As of recording this, I haven't yet seen the film, but I'm definitely interested to see how it updates this moralism. These films are very much in the vein of those that reject our modern, sentimentalized view of Christmas, and instead return to the holiday's far more macabre origins. In fact, long before Christianity reshaped the season, pagan celebrations framed this time of year as one of judgment, especially for children. From these early traditions emerged the familiar trope of the naughty and nice list, though its ancient consequences were far more terrifying than the mild threat of coal we invoke today. Across Europe, folklore brims with dark enforcers of holiday morality. In Germany, Knecht Ruprecht punished children who failed to pray. In Holland, the fur-clad spectre Belsnickel whipped the disobedient. Even more horrifying is Frau Persta, an Alpine witch said to roam the 12 days of Christmas, disemboweling those that she deemed bad. But no figure has captured modern imaginations more fully than Austria's goat-like Krampus, Santa's malevolent shadow, who drags misbehaving children away in chains or condemns the truly wicked straight to hell. These older, more sinister traditions have proven irresistible to filmmakers, offering a darker counterpoint to the cozy holiday myths that we tell today. And the most famous film of this nature is 2015's The Krampus. Krampus brings these folkloric terrors into the modern home, beginning with a family so consumed by stress, consumerism, and petty conflict that the spirit of Christmas barely survives. Only young Max, guided by his German grandmother, still believes in the holiday's deeper meaning, a hope he abandons when his relatives cruelly mock his letter to Santa. His rejection of Christmas summons Krampus, whose arrival turns the neighborhood into a frozen wasteland, and unleashes a legion of grotesque holiday creatures that pick off the family one by one. Max eventually tries to undo his mistake by sacrificing himself, only to awaken on Christmas morning with his family seemingly restored. Yet the final reveal that they are all trapped inside one of the Krampus's snow globes suggests a far more chilling outcome. Blending humor, horror, and folklore, Krampus exposes the hollowness beneath modern festivities, reminding us that abandoning the season's values might invite something far darker than an empty stocking. Many of these moralistic Christmas horror films critique the commercialization of the holiday, the season's aggressive consumer culture, Black Friday chaos, frantic gift buying, and manic pursuit of the perfect celebration certainly creates fertile ground for horror. As already referenced, Gremlins literalizes consumer excess through its destructive creatures, turning cute commodities into chaos. And Krampus shows a family so overwhelmed by materialism and obligation that they lose the spirit of the holiday entirely. Then, most obviously, there's Eli Roth's 2023 film Thanksgiving. Whether subtle or overt, Christmas horror often positions consumerism as a corrupting force, suggesting that the true threat to the holiday isn't supernatural monsters but the way that capitalism has reshaped it. After decades of relative quiet, the mid to late 2010s did see a resurgence in Christmas horror, reflecting renewed cultural interest in folklore, nostalgia, and genre experimentation. Films like 2015's A Christmas Horror Story revived the anthology structure and again brought Krampus directly into mainstream horror. 2016's Better Watch Out reimagined the home invasion narrative with a Christmas twist, blending psychological horror with dark humor. And 2017's Anna and the Apocalypse fused Christmas, zombies, and musical theater. Something once unfathomable, but always possible during the zombie boom. This more modern wave demonstrates the flexibility of Christmas horror, as it no longer has to rely solely on slasher tropes or folklore creatures, but just like any other horror film, can now embrace satire, innovation, and hybrid genres while still exploring the same core themes of fear, pressure, and expectation. I mean, despite its cheerful branding, Christmas is one of the most emotionally loaded times of the year. Beneath the surface level joy lies pressure, to perform happiness, to maintain family harmony, to spend money we often don't have, and to live up to the cultural ideals of the perfect Christmas. And these horror films tap into this tension. They expose the fractures beneath the facade, resentments, dysfunction, loneliness, and nostalgia that curdles into fear of loss. Christmas horror resonates because it releases that tension. It gives audiences permission to acknowledge that this holiday, so insistently marketed as joyful, is also stressful, messy, and sometimes painful. In confronting those anxieties head-on, Christmas horror becomes strangely cathartic. With the increase of socially aware horror in the 2020s, It's no surprise that many of our more modern Christmas horror films reflect this. Let's take Terrifier 3 from last year, for example. Now, I know. Before you question this in the comments, let me explain. The Terrifier franchise is by no means your typical 2020s elevated horror. And good, not everything needs to be. But I also think that it's too often unfairly criticized as just pure gore. Sure, there's a lot of gore, but I also think that Sienna Shaw is one of the most interesting characters in any modern horror franchise. In the third film, her second appearance in the franchise, we see Sienna and her brother Jonathan dealing with the grief and trauma following the events of Terrifier 2. Through both characters, we see two very different ways to deal with this grief, but both are equally realistic. By setting this film at Christmas time, the effects of having lost both their parents is simply amplified. We see them both grappling with what it means to celebrate Christmas in these circumstances. How to be good siblings, cousins, nephews, and nieces during this difficult time. In that way, if you take out Art the Clown, it's actually quite realistic and probably quite familiar to a lot of people.
Right, well now hold on, now listen. I'm wearing the outfit, right? So it's just like Elvis. He gets the full Santa experience if he wants it, all right? Hello. Hi. Yeah, come on over, it's fine. Yeah. Hi, yes, that's me, guilty as charged.
Hey, Santa, it looks like you got a fan.
Another example from the 2020s that deals with a completely different social question is Christmas Bloody Christmas. This is another slasher, but one that deals with the very relevant conversations of technology turning against us. And likewise, there's Violent Night, another pretty straightforward slasher, but one that engages with questions of class and the commercialization of Christmas. Together, these films reveal why Christmas horror continues to endure. The genre speaks to something fundamental about the season itself. Even at its most sentimental, Christmas is a narrative of hope emerging from hardship. Light flickering in darkness, joy fought for rather than guaranteed. Horror simply pushes these tensions to their limits, exposing the anxieties we often bury beneath the tinsel and tradition. Whether rooted in pagan folklore, Victorian ghost stories, or modern social unrest, Christmas horror reminds us that fear and festivity have always coexisted. The holiday isn't diminished by the darkness, it's defined by the struggle against it. And as these films like to warn us, remember, you'd better be good for goodness sake. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Christmas horror, please like and subscribe. And now I want to hear your thoughts. What are your favourite Christmas horror films? There are so many that I didn't get to mention here, many of which aren't super decked in the iconography of the season, but are more just set at this time of year, such as Inside and Deep Bread, so let me know any of your faves. I'll even accept American Psycho as an answer. That one Christmas party scene has definitely earned it honorary festive status in my mind. And whether or not this time of year makes you feel like Sienna Shaw battling against Art the Clown to have a nice time, I want to wish you a Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays or just simply a good day.